It's kind of amazing to me that we are so good at taking words and using them to make ourselves feel better or to describe some kind of an ideal, when in fact the outcome of what those words mean is the exact opposite. It may not just be the abandonment of that ideal, but actually some harm that comes about instead of it. This is particularly true in politics, and I don't want to get in that in this conversation, but both American parties are very good at naming legislation for an ideal when in fact that ideal is not even the intention of the legislation and certainly isn't the outcome. But what's more important to me is to consider how we use this individually to our detriment, as groups and sometimes as individual. There's two terms I want to focus on here. One is called culture, honor culture. It's a two-word phrase, honor culture. And the second is respect. How do we demonstrate respect, specifically or especially self respect in our behaviors? Let's look at honor culture first. It really is a term that dates back to the founding of the United States and probably exists in many other cultures as well. It was a way of settling scores, often through violence, because that's how honor was preserved. There was a time in the U.S. when men would duel it out, literally, with pistols through a kind of a bizarre ritual by which they would pace off, turn around, and fire, and one of them is going to die. You know, some of a particular founder of the U.S., Alexander Hamilton, died that way at the hands of a political adversary. Many other examples exist. But honor culture continues to be a problem in the U.S. in the extreme demonstration of violence, primarily with guns, directed against people who ought to be able to resolve their differences civilly, or perhaps just, certainly not by killing each other. The American death rate by weapons is extremely high, and particularly so disproportionately depending on ethnicity. In America's largest cities, which are quite violent these days, the murder or death rate by firearm among African American or black men, especially, runs 9 to 10 times that of white counterparts. Now, this isn't a racist statement. It really is an expression of my profound concern and really sadness over this because to me, life is precious and race doesn't matter. So it isn't intended to put anyone on the defense or to make them feel bad, but it brings into play another term that's related, and that is respect. How do we show respect for ourselves and for one another, whether we're pertaining to our family members or members of a group or members of a race? Doesn't really matter. Again, honor culture and respect should be seen, I think, universally by all peoples, regardless of their cultural background or racial distinctions or their level of education. Or their financial status. None of that should matter. We should be able to agree that fundamentally all people are of infinite value and therefore worthy of respect towards one another and self respect in how they carry themselves in the world. In practice, these ideals, though, are not being universally applied in our lives. And this bothers me a great deal, again, because I befriend people regardless of where they come from, what language they speak, what color their skin is. It really doesn't matter to me. And therefore, I think I'm bold enough here to share this part of myself with you, that when I see disparities based or that are sort of concentrated in one group over another, that's a red flag that I think we ought to address as individuals and collectively as society. And you do that by, in to some extent, by talking about it, by being willing to admit that there's a problem here and begin to explore for ways to overcome it, which are primarily going to be up to individuals to do in their own relationships. Honor culture means I have to show I'm right. I have to restore the honor that I feel has been betrayed by someone's behavior towards me, even though in extreme cases that may mean putting my life on the line or just taking matters into my own hands and taking someone else's life. Now, these are extreme examples of it. Most of the time, most of us are going to encounter our need to preserve our dignity or honor or respect as we see it on some other way of behaving. That could be verbal assault. Maybe it's going to be a physical fight, but even that's less likely. We're more likely to just try to get the last word, to be right, because our honor in our way of thinking requires us not only to be right, but to make sure that someone else knows it and that they acknowledge that, or they're forced to at least, if not admit it, see to it that it's there. Are there times when that's necessary? Probably. I think using never is always a risky thing to do. But most of the time, if we choose our battles carefully, if we decide what issues are worth, pursuing to that extent, we're going to find that a good share of the time, even if we think we're right, and by the way, we might not be. Maybe the other party is right objectively, because we can skew our own justification, our own positions in so many ways that make us convinced that we're right, even when we're not. But let's just assume for this example that we are, that objectively most people would agree that we're right. But by golly, we've been harmed by someone else's words or actions, and we just want to make darn sure they're either punished for it or at the very least that they admit or are forced to note that they were wrong. That can come at an extremely high price. Ultimately, in the example I used at the beginning, lives can be lost. Laws can be broken. People can end up in jail. But far short of that, relationships can be damaged to an extent that they may be irreparable. You have to decide, is it worth it? There's going to be those times, I suppose, when it is, but there's a good many times when it isn't, that the insult does not rise to that level where the price is simply too high to warrant the kind of reaction, the overreaction that we're putting into it, ostensibly to retain our honor. Self-respect allows us the extent of really self-confidence to once in a while walk away, to turn that other cheek. That's really what Christ, if we want to get religious for just a moment, talks about when he says, if someone slaps your cheek, let him have the other one. He's not saying become a pushover in that example. What he is saying is that choose your battles carefully. Sometimes the collateral damage is far too great, not just to the supposed adversary, but to us, to you yourself. Think that through, please, before taking matters further. Thanks.